who also very much had a Celtic spirit, I think, in the sense of really seeing the aliveness of all of Earth and all of creation. And she has a beautiful concept that some of you are probably familiar with called viriditas. Viriditas is a Latin word and it means the greening power of God. And for Hildegard, this greening power was manifest through all of creation. So you could, if you ever visit the Rhine Valley where she lived in Germany, you can see that greenness, and aliveness that, very ripe there in the physical landscape around her. But it also for her represented like a spiritual quality as well, that we all have this greening life energy, life force that is the greening power of God that moves through our bodies and our spirits and our souls, and is what brings us alive, brings us health and healing and wholeness. And when we're blocked from viriditas, from this greening power, we get physical illness, we get emotional illness, and we get kind of soul sickness as well. And so what I wanted to do to begin our session today is to play this beautiful song that my teaching partner Betsy Beckman wrote about the Viriditas, this greening power of God. Betsy and I have led many pilgrimages to the Rhine Valley on Hildegard of Bingen, so she's very much a co-lover of Hildegard. And this video, you can just listen to the song. It's a lovely chant that repeats itself, and you can just enter into it that way. But she also will demonstrate some movements, some gesture prayers. So if you are feeling like you want to enter your body into some prayer as we begin, you can also reflect back what Betsy is offering to you. So I invite you to take a couple of nice deep breaths and to really breathe in that greening power that Hildegard said comes from the spirit, comes from that divine source of breath, that divine source of everything that is green and lush and alive in the world. And that very greening is moving through our souls, available to us at every moment. And so breathing in that beautiful greening power and breathing out, letting go anything that gets in the way, that blocks that flow of that vital greenness in our lives. And maybe just holding for a moment, just noticing, is there a place in my body or my heart or my spirit that I want to call in this greening power more fully into my life, into my experience, into my prayer? I invite you to hold that prayer as we listen to this song.
Let my soul be green. Veriditas, the greening of my soul. Let my soul be greening with the living light. Let my heart awaken morning from the night. Let the Spirit guide me to presence true and whole. Veriditas, veriditas, the greening of my
Just take a few moments to breathe in that image of Veriditas, the greening of your soul. It comes from this God of the living light. And just notice where it wants to move in you. And then resting for a moment in the stillness, letting that bathe you. And then coming back to this circle. So greenness might be one way that we consider Earth's gifts for us. And I like to think of Veriditas as also the source of our creativity, our creative aliveness, our creative energy. Certainly Hildegard was a prolific woman, creative in so many different ways. She composed music, she was a herbalist, a spiritual director, a poet, a preacher. She was an amazing woman who also struggled a lot with physical health. And so there's a wonderful book that I recommend to you if you're interested in Hildegard. There's lots of great books on Hildegard directly, but this book is called God's Hotel, and it's actually written by a medical doctor, Victoria Sweet. She worked in a long-term care facility in San Francisco. And she, as a medical doctor, she also was studying for a PhD in medieval history. She probably had a lot of time on her hands. I just think it's kind of amazing. And she fell in love with Hildegard and this idea of greening. And so she was bringing this idea of Veriditas into her care with patients, and to ask that question when she was working with someone, and she had the gift of being with someone over a long period of time. To ask, where is the Veriditas moving freely, and what is blocking it? So it's a remarkable book, just if you enjoy kind of memoir type reading. But we're going to be focusing a bit more on stone today as well. Stone, that, the foundation of Earth, right? The stone beneath our feet. And before I moved to Ireland, I loved stones. I used to collect them when I was in Seattle, and we'd go to the beaches and so forth. But I didn't think so much about the kind of stone that we had around us until I moved to Ireland. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. But first, I just thought I'd invite you just to put in, if there's like a word or a phrase that you connect with, like what is your association with stone? Maybe what is the stone, the local stone of your geologic region, if you happen to know that. Or if there's like an image, roll away the stone in the scriptures, or if there's just a line that comes to you or an image, do you feel drawn to stones, and what is it about the quality of stone that calls to you? And so just to get us thinking a little bit about what stone is, and how does it form a foundation for our own lives and our creativity as well. So there's a number of ones that just came through. Granite, the sweet, slow grounding of stone, ancient wisdom, smooth versus broken stones. Stone is my element, holds the wisdom of the eons, grounding. Stone soup, the children's book. Helderberg bluestone, Gaia's magnetism, vibrations made manifest. White quartz, our labyrinth is made from it, and it is stunning. That sounds gorgeous. Limestone of the Burren teaches me, yes, a medium that endures even when carved to tell a story. Birthstones, gray lace, the stone walls of Ireland. Granite, solid, ancient, holders of energy, beautiful. Stone walls, boundaries, cairns, building labyrinths with stones, river stones, holders of secrets, beautiful. Okay, I'm not going to read all of them, but those are wonderful, wonderful just to get us thinking about that. So I'm going to just show you. So living here in Galway City as I do, I live right by two different, very different geologic formations. And one of them is the Burren, as a couple people mentioned. And I just have a picture here of it. And this description is just from the Burren National Park website. But I had never encountered a landscape like this before. It's what's known as a karst landscape, Karst, where the bedrock is exposed. And what I find remarkable about the limestone that the Burren is made of is that it was originally tropical seabed from 350 million years ago. And this seabed, the stone, is made from sediment that was compressed into these strata. So they contain fossils of corals and sea urchins and sea lilies and ammomites. And so basically when you're holding one of these limestone pieces, you're holding like the fossils of, thousands of creatures that are compacted, compressed into that stone, which I think is kind of a remarkable sense of connection to the ancientness of life. Some of you talked about those ancient secrets that the stone holds, which I very much feel, especially here in Ireland. And another quality of the Burren is that because the drainage, the water all flows underground, so you don't really get many lakes in the Burren, but you do get what are called turlocks. So if the water does start to rise really high, there are these kind of spontaneous lakes that appear when the water table gets high, particularly in the winter when we get a lot of rain, a lot of rainstorms. And there's the Burren region is also known as the area in Ireland with the highest density of ecclesiastical sites. So in the Burren, you have the highest number of these old church ruins, holy well ruins, and other kinds of sacred monuments, which is quite remarkable. And I think if you see the picture here is pretty representative of what the Burren looks like. There's some hills that are, kind of these sort of sloping shapes. And you think about how the ancient Irish monks were very deeply inspired by the desert monastic tradition, and how the desert monks, went out into the desert, into the wilderness to find this place of radical solitude, radical communion with the divine. And for many of the ancient Irish monks, the Burren was the place for them that best represented this place of barren wilderness. And it's kind of an austere landscape sometimes, particularly in the wintertime. It looks very much sometimes like you're walking on the moon, but it's also in the summertime this place of botanical wonder, because there are wildflowers that grow in the cracks between the stones there, from alpine, Arctic, and Mediterranean climates, all growing side by side. And I think it's the only place in the world that this actually happens. So it's quite a remarkable place. And so this is, just an hour at most, maybe 45 minutes from Galway. in the direction of the south on the other side of Galway Bay. When I look out my window, I look south across the bay and I can see the Burren Hills from my window. And then if you go west instead, out from Galway, you come to Connemara, which might be a name that you've heard of or a place that you've been before. And the rocks that are in Connemara National Park are very different. They're actually metamorphic rocks that are granite, quartz, and marble. There's this beautiful green marble that comes from Connemara. If you go into the cathedral that's in Galway City, all of the floors are this beautiful green Connemara marble. And you can, of course, buy jewelry made with this marble. But this rock is different than the other. It's formed from sediments from between 700 and 550 million years ago. And there were these upheavals in the Earth's crust, volcanic eruptions, and the shifting of plates to create these mountain ranges that you see. So the mountains here are definitely more of that kind of more traditional mountain look to them. And the mountains here are covered in bog and heather, largely in heather, although lots of other wildflowers around. Gorse, if you've ever seen it, lots of gorse in Connemara. Although originally these mountains would have been covered with forest, so like most of Ireland would have been. So that's something, the landscape has definitely been altered over time. And it's very different than the Burren in that the water actually stays above ground and there's lots of beautiful lakes all over Connemara. And I think for me, what struck me when I moved here and then I started visiting these two landscapes was how beautiful they both were, how they were both so they so immersed me in stone and these ancient stories. And for me, the limestone has much more of a feminine quality and feel to me. It's a softer rock, so the water makes it that more kind of rounded edges and the water goes underground in the holy wells. And then in Connemara, the mountains feel more jagged to me. If you climb any of the trails, there's lots of scree, which is like these, sharp granite stones that are all over the trail, which make it a little bit more difficult to climb. There's more of that masculine energy. The peaks are higher. And it just got me interested in the story of stone and how I had never really thought about it before, but it's become such an important part for me of the story of living in Ireland. And as many of you mentioned, the stone walls that are everywhere, the gray lace of Ireland, that the stone walls were largely built to help farmers clear their fields. I mean, they serve a practical purpose of creating boundaries around the fields to keep the cattle in, but they were also created simply to get rid of the stone because there's just so much stone everywhere. And particularly in places like the Burren, if we've ever been out to the Aran Islands, Inishmore, Inisheer, and Inishmain, those islands have the same geology as the Burren as well. And so you go out there and they're just these little, Burren limestone rocks jutting out of the sea where these people, have lived for, thousands of years. So it got me particularly interested because, of course, there's all these stone, quote unquote, ruins everywhere. There are hundreds and hundreds of these stone churches that are just left dotting the landscape everywhere. And they all have stories in them. Most of them don't have roofs anymore. Some of them, if they do have a roof, it's been, partially reconstructed. But to stand in these places, you really feel the presence of the prayers. Many of these churches would have been pilgrimage sites, places that people would have come on pilgrimage with their own longings and prayers for healing. And near most of these churches, there is a holy well, a place where you would go to dip into those healing waters of the earth. And so find stone and water in particular here in Ireland to be a really powerful healing combination, and very much an alive part of the landscape, that these churches don't really feel like ruins at all. They feel like, let's see, John Philip Newell wrote in one of his books about, that if you've ever been to Iona, the restored Abbey Church is beautiful, and of course has a roof and is where people worship. But there's the nunnery, which is more like these ruins in Ireland, which is the old women's convent, which hasn't been restored. And he talks about how there's something really magical about being in that space without a roof. And you really do get that sense when you're standing in these stone churches that you're open to the elements, to the rain, to the sun, to the wind. And so all of the elements are at play here. And yet the stone itself creates this beautiful container and holding place for all these longings and all these prayers that have traveled across those thresholds, across those doorways inside. And so this is kind of a long quote. I'll be sending you the slide later so you can read it in more detail. But this is from a book that I highly recommend to you if you haven't yet encountered Sharon Blackie's work. Sharon used to live in Connemara, not far from me. She's moved to Wales since, but she wrote a wonderful book called If Women Rose Rooted. And it's a book very much in the spirit, if you know Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, all about those mythical stories of women, of the wise woman archetype. And Sharon does something similar, but she draws on stories from the Celtic tradition, mainly pre-Christian. Her focus is more on the pre-Christian tradition. So if you're interested in the stories from that time, I highly recommend that you check out her book. But one of the practices that she explores in there, and she talks about, is this idea of there used to be the practice of marrying the land. And I thought this was a beautiful image for this week on Stone, Earth, and Mountain. And this idea that if the king was a just king, was someone who was treating the land with respect, who had a cherishing for earth and kept that relationship in balance and in harmony, that the earth would then return that with abundance. There would be this sense of harmony. And she said this practice of marrying the land actually has survived until just a couple of centuries ago. This sense of a contract that we have between ourselves and between the land, this beautiful image, I think. And a lot of her work is about unpacking these ancient stories as a way of renewing our relationship with earth. And so she says, when that contract is broken, the fertile land becomes the wasteland. And so, like today, we find ourselves cut off from these roots. We find ourselves in a wasteland of unbelonging, in the throes of a worldwide environmental crisis of our own making. And so for her, one of the antidotes is to go back to this earlier sense of really honoring and protecting the land, and respecting the sovereignty of the land, of its own right to existence and flourishing. And then just a few thoughts on earth and creativity, and I'm sure you might have more to add to this list, but and this picture here is a stone ruin out in Connemara, out on the Renville Peninsula. It's out of it feels like the edge of the world when you're out there. And it's a beautiful place to be, because from that, it's the north west corner of Connemara. And when you look out from there, you see all these islands out jutting up into the Atlantic, out from the Atlantic, I should say. And all of those islands had monasteries on them as well. So it's kind of a remarkable viewpoint or vista, and to consider these monks that were drawn to these really wild edge places on earth to really kind of get to the edge. If you've ever seen Skellig Michael, I'm sorry I didn't think to include a picture of it, but it's down in the southwest corner of Ireland, and it's basically, this peak that kind of juts out like this out of the Atlantic, and you can go visit it. If you've seen the last of the Star Wars movies, they filmed part of them there, much to actually my dismay, only because they did some damage to it, and now those sites have become big Star Wars sites, and so you have now the kind of conflict between this ancient pilgrimage site and people wanting to come for that purpose and people coming for this newer purpose. So anyway, just as an aside, it's a remarkable place. So we might ask ourselves some questions. What stories does the stone hold, right? Stones that have endured for millions of years, not even just hundreds or thousands of years, but millions of years, what they've witnessed in terms of the shifting of the earth, the plates moving, the ice age sweeping the stones. And yeah, what stories did this stone hold? And then of course the church ruins. Even the older than that, you have the stone circles, and you have like the stone passage tombs. So stone has been this important carrier of kind of this ancient wisdom. And what are the prayers? And what is the story that I want to tell again and again? What are the stories that I want to kind of imbue into the stone and feel kind of the weight of? Stone helps to ground us and root us. It helps us to endure. It offers us a solid foundation. What is the foundation of my own creative life and practice? And you might remember when we explored water last week, I offered the image of the river flowing and the tension between the river flowing as the creative process and then the river banks, which form that conduit, really, and the structure that we need to show up for our own spiritual practice, our own creative practice. So to hold, we need both that solidity, the foundation, the discipline, the practice of showing up again and again, and we need the beauty of that creative flow of allowing things to unfold in their own way. The element of earth invites us to consider what nourishes us well. So going back to Viriditas, Hildegard's term, and ariditas. Ariditas is basically the opposite of viriditas. It's what makes us feel arid and dried out. And if you think about the story of Ezekiel's dry bones, right, that's ariditas, the bones that have become completely desiccated and dust. And how do we welcome that or draw that viriditas back in? Earth also reminds us of our earthiness and our mortality. So that's part of the reality of being a creature of the earth, right? Am I able to welcome humility and vulnerability into my creative practice? So the root of the word humility being humus, or earth, or earthiness. So when I create something, can I enter into that practice with that vulnerability of allowing it to unfold as it wants to, as opposed to how I want to direct it? And when I'm aware of my own mortality, what becomes really essential to me? What do I know I want to devote my time and energy to? What do I know I want to create when I remember that my hours are actually quite precious and few on this earth? And then finally, earth is connected to the north, the direction of the north, to the hour of midnight, and to the season of winter. So all of those aspects of nature that are the place of darkness and stillness and mystery and unknowing. So how does time and silence and stillness nurture my creative expression? And do I allow time for incubation and gestation, or am I always working to produce something? So earth holds the full cycle of the seasons of the creative practice and process, but it also invites us deeply to remember that time of incubation as a real essential aspect or part of the creative process. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment and just see if there's any other aspect of earth and creativity that anyone here wants to add before we move into our Lectio Divina practice and our creative writing time together, inspired by earth and stone. So I'll just see if there's any other inspirations that come through, and if not, we can also save them for later. Okay. Well, let's if there are some that come through, I can read them in a little bit. Let's move into our Lectio Divina practice. So as a reminder, we're going to pray with a poem, and I'm going to pull that poem up for you. This poem is called Stone by Charles Simek. And I'm going to invite you to first to take some nice deep breaths. So we're going to move through this practice as a meditation. You're welcome to write as you move through it, or you can simply let yourself listen and be, and then there will be time to write after we complete this practice. So taking a few nice deep breaths and letting your awareness drop down into your heart center, into that place that the ancients called the cave of the heart, or the sanctuary of the heart. And resting there for a moment, simply being present to that divine spark that the mystics tell us shimmers and sparks and kindles in our hearts. Breathing that in, that presence. And then listening with the ear of your heart to this poem, which I'm going to read through for you 2 times to begin. And listen during these 2 readings for a word or a phrase that calls to you or shimmers for you in some way. Let's listen and see. Stone. Go inside a stone. That would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove or gnash with a tiger's tooth. I am happy to be a stone. From the outside, the stone is a riddle. No one knows how to answer it. Yet within, it must be cool and quiet, even though a cow steps on it full weight. Even though a child throws it in a river, the stone sinks slow, unperturbed to the river bottom, where the fishes come to knock on it and listen. I have seen sparks fly out when 2 stones are rubbed, so perhaps it is not dark inside after all. Perhaps there is a moon shining from somewhere, as though behind a hill, just enough light to make out the strange writings, the star charts on the inner walls. Go inside a stone. That would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove or gnash with a tiger's tooth. I am happy to be a stone. From the outside, the stone is a riddle. No one knows how to answer it. Yet within, it must be cool and quiet, even though a cow steps on it full weight, even though a child throws it in a river. The stone sinks slow, unperturbed to the river bottom, where the fishes come to knock on it and listen. I have seen sparks fly out when 2 stones are rubbed, so perhaps it is not dark inside after all. Perhaps there is a moon shining from somewhere, as though behind a hill, just enough light to make out the strange writings, the star charts on the inner walls. So, whatever that word or phrase is for you, taking a moment just to let that echo in your heart right now, listening for the sound of it, maybe even speaking it aloud. And then listening again. Go inside a stone. That would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove or gnash with a tiger's tooth. I am happy to be a stone. From the outside, the stone is a riddle. No one knows how to answer it. Yet within, it must be cool and quiet, even though a cow steps on it full weight, even though a child throws it in a river. The stone sinks slow, unperturbed to the river bottom, where the fishes come to knock on it and listen. I have seen sparks fly out when two stones are rubbed, so perhaps it is not dark inside after all. Perhaps there is a moon shining from somewhere as though behind a hill, just enough light to make out the strange writings, the star charts on the inner walls. So let that word or phrase unfold in your imagination, and just listening for images or words or memories that come to you, and just making a welcoming inner space for that. And then listening again, one more time. Go inside a stone. That would be my way. Let somebody else become a dove or a gnash with a tiger's tooth. I am happy to be a stone. From the outside, the stone is a riddle. No one knows how to answer it. Yet within, it must be cool and quiet, even though a cow steps on it full weight, even though a child throws it in a river. The stone sinks slow, unperturbed to the river bottom, where the fishes come to knock on it and listen. I have seen sparks fly out when two stones are rubbed, so perhaps it is not dark inside after all. Perhaps there is a moon shining from somewhere, as though behind a hill, just enough light to make out the strange writings, the star charts on the inner walls. Listening now for any sense of invitation that might be coming to you through this time of prayer, remembering that the Spirit speaks to us right where we are in our lives right now. So making space for whatever that might be. And then letting go of words and images for a few moments and simply resting into the silence for a few moments, letting yourself have the gift of simply being. Taking a couple of nice deep breaths. And very gently bringing your awareness back to the room. And then we'll take about 3 or 4 minutes just to do a little bit of free writing to get us going. Writing down anything that you want to remember from this time of reflection and time of prayer. Writing down anything that you noticed or discovered. Taking another minute. And if you want to share in the chat the word or the phrase or an image that came to you or a sense of invitation, you'd be most welcome to share just a short little window into your prayer. I see Jessica shared, the layers of earth do not mind staying hidden or being revealed in due season. Interesting affordance for each. It's a lovely awareness, Jessica, thank you. Suzanne wrote, somewhere in your center within the brittle bonds tending your inner world rests the searing heat of the star that threw you through a wondering universe to land just here at my feet. Beautiful. Let's see. So here are some of the Lectio. Don't underestimate the power and beauty in the stillness of the Stoic stone. An unfragile cocoon of belonging sinks slow, unperturbed. The secret crystalline wonder of a geode, just enough light to make out the path home. What are the strange writings on my inner walls? I hold on to my stone center when wind enters with turmoil. It's the blueprint of me, my ancestral tree going way back to creation and off into creation, into the future. How do I become more stone-like, steady and sure, yet open to the vagaries of time and nature? A rounded stone carried from Norway's river, a reminder of clean water. Silent language of stones permeate every cell of my body. So beautiful, my friends. Thank you. I'm going to pause there, and we'll have the chat transcript to read later. But feel free to keep sharing those beautiful images. We're going to move into another poem. There, I want to make sure you get a few poems on our last session to work with. So this poem is called "The Language of Insects" by Kim Moore. Kim Moore is a British poet. I highly recommend her collection, The Art of Falling. I love several of the poems in there. And this is called The Language of Insects. This is the language of insects, this body low to the ground, this single purpose, this living with the dirt, this stop, start, stop, this construction of fabulous structures, this non-human logic, this cannot live without the other, this no good as a single entity, this language, please, I cannot meet your kind again. You showed me what knees were really for. No forgiveness, none at all. This movement, there are spiders that eat one another. There are ants that follow each other in a spiral, smaller and smaller, until they take the life from one another, a black fist. All I know creeps to the edges of rooms, the flies on the windowsills, the buzzing that made it begin. So I invite you to write a poem that starts with the language of, and then fill in the blank, something earthy. It could be the language of flowers, or the language of stone, or the language of mountains, or the language of greening, or whatever it is that's calling to your heart today. And if you want to play with Kim's structure, where she keeps introducing the images with this is the language of insects, this body low to the ground, this single purpose. You don't have to do that, but just as a suggestion, if that's something that you'd like to play with. So let's take about 4 minutes to see where that takes you. Take another minute. And then maybe just share in the chat the language of, and whatever you chose, or whatever chose you for your poem. I'd love to see some of the topics that you wrote about. The language of weeds, love it. Mud, chickadees. The language of Howard's knob. This is where my little ashes will rest. The language of a sprout, tree roots, weeds. Language of soil, mountains, soil, compost, trees, tulips, children, crystal, worms. The language of weight, the stone cold on the ground. Language of absence, leaves no longer on a tree. The language of a bed of fallen pine needles. These are beautiful. Language of forest caves where yogis lived and shed their egos like old snake. Hummingbirds, footsteps, small brown donkey, leaves, light filtering through the tree. Language of home, this land, Arunachala mountain. I know I didn't say that right. The language of creek, marriage of goddess and king, water and stone. The language of sand, white sand, coral sand, volcanic sand, a patois of ground down mountains, buds in spring, ants burrowing home between the sharp rocks. Language of our pets, footsteps, beautiful, gorgeous. I want to read all those poems. So we're going to do a little gentle movement practice right now with our stones. So what I'm going to do is in a few moments, I'm going to put on just a short, like 3-minute piece of instrumental music. And what I invite you to do is to take this time to take your stone, whether it's a real stone or an imagined stone is just fine. And just to take that 3 minutes to move with your stone, and let your stone kind of guide the movement in response to the music. Let this be a prayer of your body and the stone together, and see if you can get your mind out of it. And you're welcome to, turn your video off for this or to step away from the camera, but everyone's going to be in their own process. So don't worry about this. It's not a performance. It's really a prayer. It's really a time for you to sink into your body for a few moments, to feel the earthiness of your body meet the density of the stone, and then just to see what the prayer is that unfolds in the process. So I invite you to take a couple of nice deep breaths. And when the music begins, to simply let the stone lead you in a dance and see how the stone wants to move, how it wants to invite you into its wisdom. And just taking a moment to rest in a final place with the stone, just feeling its weight in your hands, breathing into it. And then we're going to take 3 or 4 minutes to do a little free writing. What did you notice? What did you discover? What were the stories the stone told you? What was the wisdom that it shared with you? See where your writing takes you. Taking another minute. And if you'd like to just put in the chat, maybe just a word or a phrase that expresses something of your experience of dancing with the stone, that would be most welcome. I see Margaret said the language of stone seems hard and structured, yet if we are still, we can understand its unhurried grammar. Beautiful image. Stability, strong movement, skipping, tossing, lightning. Lovely. What am I holding on to that weighs me down like a stone? My stone misses its companions. Formed, shaped, transformed over time. The stone is so ancient, I am so temporary. Those are beautiful images. Thank you. Feel free to keep adding those in. I'm going to try and get us to do one more exercise before we come to the end of our retreat. Oops, sorry. This is what I want. So this poem is called Why Write by Barbara Crooker. And she says, because I'm here this late in the century, looking at the ink-filled sky, seeing the April comet, a luminous exclamation, not believing with the alternatives of nuclear char or unchecked epidemic that anything from our time will last. But still, I was here on this rock, this shaly hillside, violets blooming in the grass for a short time. I suffered, I lived, I loved in the face of everything, and I have to write it down. So as we come to this last week of our retreat together, I ask you to take that question to heart, why write? It might be something that you've already known, but it might also be something new that you've discovered in these 4 weeks with the elements. So I invite you to make a few minutes to free write and see what comes forth. Why do you write? What is that enduring quality that you want to carry through with you in your writing? Take another minute. And then if you would like to write just a line into the chat, to have a group poem about why write, that would be lovely. Most welcome. Why write? Messages from spirit through my own soul, never before, never again. Roger can't get the Simek poem out of his head and heart. Lovely. For a peek at the hidden message in the rebel, to embody the movements of my spirit, not to trap them, make them unmovable, but to remember them before they fly away. To remember my hands following the walls out to the light. Mysteries want to share their secrets, to be heard even if I never share it. Words written on a page integrate heart, mind, body, and spirit. Because many years ago, I knew I wanted to be Jo March, touching upon the unknown images and emotions within me, to crack open my heart, to unlock what I'm thinking and feeling. Because I can't paint and draw, I write just like the creators of petroglyphs did, to signal wonder and importance. I write to endure. It helps by soul expression what it needs to, the way it needs to, when it needs to take a snapshot of the feelings and thoughts of the moment. So beautiful. I love this group poem. I'll send out that chat transcript at the end so we can have that whole thing. I did want to close. I'm going to read you a poem of mine, and then I'm going to share with you a video version of it, just a short 1.5 minute visual. But it seemed appropriate for our topic, because the poem is called Dreaming of Stones, which is actually the name of my first poetry collection. And this poem was inspired by Saint Ida. She is one of the early medieval saints in Ireland, one of the women saints. She was a teacher of many of the other saints that came later, including Saint Brendan, who's probably one of the better known ones. And in the story of Saint Ida, it's said that she had a dream in which an angel presses 3 precious stones into her palm. And I loved that image. I sat with it for a long time and imagined, what if this were my dream? And I invite you to do the same thing. What if this were your dream? And there's some questions that the poem asks you to hold. Dreaming of stones. In the world before waking, I meet a winged one, feathered, untethered, who presses in my palm 3 precious stones, like Saint Ida in her dream. But similarities and there, her with saintliness and certainty, me asking questions in the dark. All I know is I am not crafted from patience of rock or gravity of earth, nor flow of river. I am not otter with her hours devoted to play. I am none of these, at least not yet. The stones will still be singing centuries from now, made smooth by all kinds of weather. If I strike them together, they spark and kindle. Do I store them as treasures to secretly admire on storm-soaked days, or wear them as an amulet around my neck? When the angel returns to me in the harsh truth of last morning, will she ask, what have I endured, treasured, and sparked? Will she ask, what have I hidden away, and what made visible? So I'm going to invite you just to listen to that poem one more time, this time with some imagery. And again, just seeing what those questions stir in you.
In the world before waking, I meet a winged one, feathered, untethered, who presses in my palm 3 precious stones, like Saint Ida in her dream. But similarities end there, her with saintliness and certainty, me asking questions in the dark. All I know is I am not crafted from patience of rock or gravity of earth, nor flow of river. I am not otter with her hours devoted to play. I am none of these, at least not yet. The stones will still be singing centuries from now, made smooth by all kinds of weather. If I strike them together, they spark and kindle. Do I store them as treasures to secretly admire on storm-soaked days, or wear them as an amulet around my neck? When the angel returns to me in the harsh truth of last morning, will she ask, what have I endured, treasured, and sparked? Will she ask, what have I hidden away, and what made visible?
So just invite you to hold those questions for a few moments in your heart. And as we come to the almost the end of our last session, but we're going to be moving into our small group option. So for those of you who want to stay on, we'll be having the chance to share in small groups. And for those of you who don't, then I just want to wish you all blessings, particularly of the solidity of earth, the endurance of stone, the greening of the viriditas. May all of these elements help to nourish and support your creative life going forward. And it's been such a real gift and a pleasure to journey with you during these 4 weeks. So I have a very grateful heart to have spent this time with you. And as always, I will add the files for week 4, which will include the presentation, the poems, and even some suggestions for this coming week. So you're not quite done yet. I have a few suggestions for you so you can keep on writing, and hopefully I will see you again in another creative class. And the video, yeah, the video will be coming as well, the recording. So wonderful to be with you. If you're not staying on for the small groups, you can log off now. And if you are staying on for the small groups, that's wonderful. Just a reminder that we'll have groups of 3 to 4, and 3 to 4 people will have only about 12 minutes to share, which kind of helps us get right to the heart of things. Each person takes a turn to read something short out loud. No disclaimers allowed, and the other people in the groups just simply reflect back a line or a phrase that shimmers for you in some way. And then once you've had a chance to all to share, if you have another couple of minutes just to talk a little bit about the process and what you're discovering. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fia to put you into the groups, and she will send you on your way. For anything that you shared together in the time of, in our last time of sharing. So it's been such a real gift to be with you during this time, and I'm really inspired by all of the work that you've produced. I honestly would love to read all of the poems. Really beautiful work. If any of you want to send any of them our way, you're welcome to send them to Abbey the Arts. See, Margaret says, lovely people, promising images. Ron has shared his Gmail address, I'm assuming to connect with people who want to connect. Jessica says, very precious to hear tiny glimpses of our hearts in such beautiful words. Lovely. Deborah, people can post their poems to the Facebook group. Yeah, if you're in the Facebook group, you're welcome to post the poems there, and that group will stay active for the next few days. I'll put a note in there about that. So lovely. All right, my friends. So it's really been a treasure to spend this time with you, and hopefully I will see you again soon in some creative venue or capacity. And I wish you all just the most flourishing of your creativity, and also the permission to really surrender and yield into the deepest rest that you need to incubate all those wonderful ideas. So blessings, my friends, and I will see you again soon.